all you gals and boys, I'm just from Tuckahoe. I'm going to sing a little song. My name's Jim Crow. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. I went down to the river.
In 1836, Jim Crow is born. He begins his strange career as a malicious minstrel caricature of a black man, created by a white man to amuse white audiences. Jim Crow would come to symbolize one of the most tragic eras of race relations in American history, a time deeply rooted in promise and contradiction. 1865, 4 million Americans, slaves simply because they were born black, were now free. But in little over a decade, that promise was gone, replaced by a rigid system of laws designed to keep blacks from experiencing any of their newly achieved rights. It would be known as the era of Jim Crow, the American form of racial apartheid.
But I tried to lean inside and get me a cup of water. And those white people beat me till I was unconscious. They thought I was dead.
My dad said, as long as you're living in this South, you're going to have to go to the back door in this town. Now, you just settle for that. He said, but one thing I want you to swear and promise to me, that you will never get used to it.
I'm not ashamed of the segregated and Jim Crow experience, all because we were able to devise techniques for survival that permitted us to abide our time and to wait until our change come.
As most blacks were willing to bide their time, some began to fight back. In the late 1880s and 90s, they embarked on an uncertain campaign to secure voting rights, build their own communities, schools, businesses, and churches, and to demand redress against mob violence and lynching. The white supremacists fought back. By 1919, the Ku Klux Klan, which had been a Southern idiosyncrasy, became a national ideology. White supremacy, the power behind Jim Crow, appeared invincible. And over the next decade, the violence against blacks would grow even more horrific. But black Americans continued to battle, using the power of the press and ultimately the power of the courts to pursue their quest for freedom and equality against racism. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is their story, the story of strong men and women who would never accept the demeaning, threatening, and perilous world of Jim Crow. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is the story of those who, in the face of unending terror, achieved triumphs. Triumphs that would in time make America a better place, not just for themselves, but for all of us. Conflict over black emancipation is as old as the nation. In 1861, the South left the Union rather than remain part of a country that restricted the expansion of slavery. At first, Abraham Lincoln saw the struggle as simply a war to save the nation. But in time, he would recast the Civil War as a war to end slavery. On January 1st, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in the Confederate States. 6 months after the South surrendered, Congress ratified the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. The federal government had made a promise to the former slaves, these newly freed men and women who knew what they wanted: education and the right to vote, equal rights in the courts, and mostly, land.
What is it that your people need now that you're free? Our people need land, and they need tools to work the land. So there we began to see the priority to own our own land.
Every colored man will be a slave and feel himself a slave until he can raise his own bale of cotton and put his own mark upon it and says, This is mine. Without independence and self-employment, freedom would be meaningless. Peter Hall.
On Edisto Island off the coast of South Carolina, thousands of newly freed blacks were making that dream come true. On land abandoned by their former masters and given to them by the Union Army, they had built schools and churches, established family and community life. But they had heard rumors that their future was at risk. Lincoln had been assassinated, and a Southerner, Andrew Johnson, was president. Johnson fought to save the Union, but not to free slaves. "This is a country for white men," he said, "and as long as I'm president, it will be a government for white men."
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
On October 19th, 1865, a boat carrying a deeply troubled Union general, Oliver O. Howard, slowly made its way toward Edisto. Howard was known as the Christian General, a deeply religious man who hated slavery. He was in charge of the new Freedmen's Bureau, established by Congress that year to protect the confiscated lands given to the former slaves. Howard was revered second only to Lincoln by free blacks.
They got the message from the Freedmen's Bureau that the general was coming back, General Oliver O. Howard, who they were expecting to hear nothing but good news from him because he was the man who had told them about how this land now was transferred to them and that they owned it and they didn't have to worry about massa no more and everything. He asked them to gather together at the church on Edisto. So over 2,000 people came from all amongst the oak trees and all back off in the woods and from their shacks and their dirt roads to meet there at the church to hear this new discussion about their land.
"I have been sent by the President to tell you that your old masters have been pardoned, and their plantations are to be given back to them, and that they would hire blacks to work for them. Lay aside your bitter feelings and be reconciled to them. General Oliver O. Howard."
So people were enraged and people started hollering out, "No, no, ain't no way. No, no, that ain't what you tell us before. No, sir, no, sir."
"General Howard, why do you take away our lands? You take them from us who are true, always true to the government. You give them to our all-time enemies. The man who gave me 39 lashes and who stripped and flogged my mother and sister, who keeps land for me well knowing I would not have anything to do with him if I had land of my own. That man I cannot well forgive. A freedman."
Some went into "Nobody know the trouble we see," and some went into "Motherless Child," and all those things rippled off the sea.
Like a motherless child, a long way from home.
1 year later, in 1866, Congress, recognizing continued Southern resistance to black emancipation, passed the 14th and 15th Amendments, guaranteeing blacks the right to vote and due process of law. The time of Reconstruction had begun, but many whites did not plan on fulfilling the intentions of the new laws. Mississippi passed a black code, giving courts the right to apprentice former slaves, with preference to their former owners.